Let me just go with connection. No, balance. I think 60 be good enough. And no worms? Through the eye. All of his forms, and even those who do not study spellcraft can manipulate the weave. Uh, wow. And I just crashed. Still, I guess it still like some buzz worked out though, despite being a game for like 3 years, almost 4. Let me start this up again. New what? Give me a second. Right now it's verified again, so it might take a while. What can I do while it waits? It won't be that long. I guess we can watch like a short video or whatever, but yeah, I was thinking about D&D. Let me go to Firefox. Cause it's only on like 10% right now. I guess we can look up some information about the best starters. I was thinking about if they had dragon characters, I most like go with them, but they don't. Cause I was thinking more of D&D.
Light my fire, set my heart ablaze. In this Baldur's Gate 3 guide, we're going to be going through the races of Baldur's Gate 3 and going through their racial features, kind of discussing what they are, what classes they would be good for, and whether they are the right choice for you just based on their class features.
Let me just...
You're obviously free to pick whatever you want from a role-playing perspective, and you may have your choices because of that. But in this video, we're just going to cover the things that make up the racial features of these races and whether they would be good for your class or not. So first up, let's take a look at the elf race. They have standard movement speed at 9 meters. They also have weapon proficiencies in short and long swords, as well as short and long bows. They can see a decent distance in the dark with their dark vision, and they have saving throws against being charmed, and they can't be put to sleep. The advantage on saving throws to charmed and immunity to sleep is nice, but dark vision doesn't quite have the distance to make you like a full ranged character here. You'd want 24 meters for that. So you're going to be playing like a mid-range to close range character if you're leaning into that dark vision in dark places. And the proficiencies that you gain really benefit classes that don't have martial weapon proficiencies. So this is like some bards, some clerics, druids, monks, rogues, sorcerers, wizards, and maybe even warlocks. But if you took like a fighter or paladin, for instance, you would already have these weapon proficiencies, so they'd be kind of wasted. And the difference between High Elf and Wood Elf is that the High Elf can choose one cantrip at the beginning of the game. If you're talking about an offensive cantrip like Firebolt or something like that, Shocking Grasp, these are going to scale with intelligence, so I don't recommend picking up an offensive one if you're not playing an intelligence-based character. But there are some other utility ones there. For instance, Friends is a really strong cantrip if you're playing like a dialogue-focused character. A lot of dialogue-focused characters will be able to pick this up, but it could save you a slot for a cantrip that you might be able to pick something else up with, or maybe if you're playing Paladin that doesn't get this, and you want to have this on your Paladin, it's not a bad choice. And Wood Elves gain movement speed, so that's really good for like positioning in combat and getting into melee range, particularly on a melee character, but also on a ranged character. So the decision is, if you're playing an intelligence-based character, you might pick up resistance, which gives them resistance to fire damage, meaning they only take half fire damage when they take fire damage. And the difference in subclasses really comes down to a couple things. First is the cantrip or level 0 spell. They
do have tieflings, so okay, so they're what I want to be.
They each have a different one that kind of specializes in different things. We'll mouse over those so you can see what they are. But one thing that you won't see during character creation is that as these races level up, they'll actually gain spells as well, and they'll gain different spells. So the Asmodeus Tiefling will gain Hellish Rebuke and Darkness once per long rest at level 3 and level 5.
I think it's done patching.
The Mephistopheles Tiefling will gain Burning Hands at level 3 and Flame Blade at level 5. Again, these are once per rest. And the Zariel Tiefling will gain the Searing Smite and Branding Smite abilities.
I just go with Tiefling.
They can use.
I was already playing too. I didn't see it yet.
5. Dark Vision, just like on Elves, is very useful for specific places of this game, making this a good racial choice for anyone. And I think the choice of subrace really comes down to the spells that you gain, the ones that I mentioned as you level up. And also whether or not you want to use Thaumaturgy, which gives you advantage on Intimidation and Performance checks. So maybe if you plan to be a character that uses Intimidation a lot. Moving to Drow, Drows have Drow weapon training, which gives them proficiency with Rapier, Short Sword, and Hand Crossbow. They also have superior Dark Vision, which allows them to see in the dark 24 meters compared to the 12 meters of Elf, Tiefling, and a couple other races. And they also have Fey Ancestry similar to Elves, which makes it so that they have advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and they can't be put to sleep. I'll say that the weapon proficiencies for this race are kind of negligible unless you're playing like a pure spellcaster that basically has no proficiencies, because Bard and Rogue have these proficiencies exactly and even more, and so do other martial classes like Fighter, Paladin, Ranger. They have all these already, so this isn't particularly great for most martial classes and most kind of hybrid classes. It's really only good for casters. I think because you have superior dark vision here, you're kind of be able to be a long-range specialist in dark places, and I think if you plan to play a very long-ranged character, Drow is a good choice, because in those dark places, you'll still be able to connect with your ranged attacks with bows or crossbows or spells at long shields. And they also have an additional skill to be proficient in, so they can pick one more on top of the class that they are, and their carrying weight has been increased by 25%. So the issue with the human proficiencies is that you would basically have to take a casting class to gain the benefit of this, or maybe a hybrid class that doesn't have access to martial weapons. So something like a cleric, maybe, if it's not a Tempest or War Cleric, might benefit from this, being able to use these martial weapons as well, but they won't make use of the light armor proficiency since they'll already have this. So some of these proficiencies, kind of no matter which way you go, will be wasted, so that's not optimal. But the extra skill proficiency could be great on a utility character, like on a rogue or a ranger, or maybe a bard to gain even more skills, or maybe on a character that just doesn't have a lot of skills in general, since most other classes only have 2 skills. Picking up an extra skill could make them a lot more useful outside of combat. I think that's really the reason to pick human, is that extra skill proficiency. So this takes us to Githyanki, and Githyanki has something called Astral Knowledge, which makes it so they gain proficiency and all skills of a chosen ability until their long rest. So they can change this after each long rest, and by ability they mean something like dexterity or strength or intelligence, something like that. So if they pick dexterity, for instance, they'd have proficiency in acrobatics, sleight of hand, and stealth until their next long rest. And then maybe they, take intelligence, and so now they have proficiency in arcana, history, investigation, nature, and religion. And they can keep changing this each time they rest, or they can keep it on the same one. But that's huge, right? This is like invaluable because you can get an entire skill group of proficiencies just from this one thing. Being able to change it constantly kind of makes Githyanki ahead of a lot of races in terms of their effectiveness. And they also gain a decent number of proficiencies in light and medium armor, as well as proficiency in short swords, long swords, and great swords. So this is huge because, maybe you have a hybrid type character like a cleric or a druid, but you want to use a greatsword, then you could use it right away just by taking this race. Or maybe you're playing a warlock or a wizard or sorcerer and you want some better armor. Like maybe you don't have any proficiencies because you're a sorcerer or wizard. Now you have medium armor proficiency. You could slap on medium armor instantly and have more armor class just from picking this one race, making Githyanki a really, really strong race between everything that you have. So this takes us to dwarves. The first thing you're going to notice is that they can only move 7.5 meters per turn compared to the norm, which is 9 meters, so they're not going to be able to move as much in combat. They have proficiencies with battle axe, hand axe, light hammer, and warhammer, and they have dark vision, the same as elves and tieflings at 12 meters, making it kind of mid to low range in terms of what they can see in the dark. And they have dwarven resilience, which gives them advantage on saving throws against poison, and they have resistance to poison damage. So just like Elf and Tiefling, Dark Vision is nice, particularly if you're playing like a mid to short range character, like a melee character or a very short distance caster. The combat proficiencies in battle axes, hand axes, light hammers, and warhammers are not going to be super useful. If you're playing a martial class, since they'll already have these will be more applicable to maybe a class that's only got simple weapons or maybe even less than simple weapons. So they're not particularly useful to a lot of classes that might take advantage of this. And the Dwarven Resilience is just nice to prevent damage. Anytime you can prevent damage, that's good. So having that is a nice bonus. The downside, again, is the movement speed is reduced, which means that you might have a harder time getting into melee combat or getting into position if you're a ranged character. So for sub-races, first is Gold Dwarf. This increases your hit point maximum by 1 and increases this again every time you gain a level. The level cap in this game is 12, so the most you'll be able to get out of this is 12 extra hit points. That's probably the equivalent of like 1 or 1.5 levels depending on your class. That's pretty nice. I think this is going to be far better later in the game than it's going to be earlier in the game, but it's a nice little bonus if you're trying to figure out what type of dwarf. This is just good on any character, really. Shield dwarves, on the other hand, gain armor proficiency with light and medium armors. And again, this kind of benefits non-martial classes and like clerics are already going to have this, druids are already going to have this. So this is kind of like your rogues, warlocks, and maybe your wizards, orcs. Something like that is the classes that you would want this on. Otherwise, you're already going to have these proficiencies. So if you're not playing like one of those classes, maybe Bard, you're really not going to take advantage of this much. Then you have Durgar, which gains superior dark vision, changes the regular dark vision into the 24-meter variant that the Drows also have. So this is great if you're planning to play a ranged character or a spellcaster that throws long-range spells. That will help you a lot in dark areas connect with your spells. And they also gain advantage on saving throws against illusions and being charmed or paralyzed. So between that and poison, you'll be pretty tanky. And this is probably the best all-around one to pick, in my opinion, because superior dark vision is very, very strong. So that takes us to half-elf. They also have weapon proficiency with spears, pikes, halberds, and glaives, and armor proficiency with light armor and shields, just like humans do. But they also have dark vision like elves, tiefling, and dwarves, so they're going to, again, have mid to short-range dark vision in dark places. And just like elves, they have advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic can't put them to sleep. So really the choice between elf and half-elf, besides RP purposes, is the proficiencies. Do you want short and long swords and short and long bows, or do you want weapon proficiencies with stabby long weapons? And maybe the shield proficiency is what you're after. Maybe you're playing a warlock and you just want shield proficiency. This could be an easy way to get it. So that's really the difference between those. And I think that's what it's going to come down to, is whether you need those proficiencies or not. And then sub-races change a couple of things. High half-elf works very similarly to high elf. You'll get to choose a cantrip. Again, the offensive ones are based on intelligence, so if you're not an intelligence character, you probably won't take those. So if you're ever picking up like a utility one like Blade Ward or Friends or something like that, if you're not an intelligence character and you want to take high half-elf. Wood half-elf, on the other hand, will give you increased movement speed, allow you to move further in combat, just like Wood elf will. And Drow half-elf will give you access to the light cantrip, which will allow you to create light in dark places. which, might help offset some of the, vision problems of some of your characters. You yourself will have some dark vision, so you shouldn't need it, but you might have party members that don't, and that's good in those cases. So this takes us to halflings, which the first thing you'll notice is that they have lower racial speed, just like dwarves at 7.5 meters, so they can't move around as well in combat as some other races. But they also have the lucky racial feature, which makes it so they effectively can't critically miss on attack rolls, ability checks, or saving throws. So that's like a 5% chance, 1 in 20 is a 5% chance roughly, to critically miss in any of these scenarios, and anytime that happens, they get to reroll and use the new roll and die. So that's really, really strong throughout the course of a game. It might not seem like it initially, but you will probably trigger this, a lot of times over the course of a very long playthrough. And they also have advantage on saving throws against being frightened, so they're not going to be able to be frightened very easily at all. And lucky is just a great overall racial feature. It's probably one of the best in the game, so this is good for, this race is basically good for any class, but I probably wouldn't recommend it as much for a melee character that has to move around more than a ranged character. And then when you move to the sub-races, Lightfoot halflings gain advantage on stealth checks, making them incredibly hard to spot when they're on stealth. And Strongheart halflings have advantage on saving throws against poison and resistance to poison damage, kind of like dwarves do. So you're gaining some more resistance to damage, or you're going to be a bit sneakier, or a lot sneakier in this case. So depending on whether you're playing like a stealthy character or you're not playing a stealthy character, kind of determine which one of these two you choose. Because if it's not stealthy, then it's kind of the other one by default. So then this takes us to gnomes. They also have reduced movement speed, just like halflings and dwarves at 7.5 meters. And they have something called gnome cunning, which gives them advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. That's 3 of the abilities. They basically get to roll 2 dice and take the higher value when doing a saving throw for any of those abilities. That's huge in my opinion, particularly if you pair this with a class that has saving throw proficiency in like these ones, or maybe they have saving throw proficiency in dexterity and, strength, something like that, so that even though they don't have advantage in those, they're pretty well rounded in terms of their saving throws. And this is just good on really any class. First is Rock Gnome, which gives you dark vision at 12 meters. You can speak assassin or an assassin type.
We got like 3 minutes left on the verification.
Want to know why no one outbeats the Hut? 75-cent boneless wings. While prices go up, ours dip.
In Dungeons & Dragons, Tiefling is a race with demonic ancestry. They receive bonus spells at levels 3 and cast Burning Hands. This can hit multiple enemies and has a maximum damage of 24. At level 5, they can cast Flame Blade. This deals a maximum of 18 fire damage with each hit. You'll be able to keep using it as long as concentration is not broken. So be sure someone else is taking all the hits from enemies.
I don't think I'm gonna vote for this one.
Even though the fighter has an extra attack, using the Flame Blade uses up both the regular and bonus actions. I think this is a bug. Concentration was broken because of that attack from the Minotaur, and the blade was lost. Here's the other bonus spell called Burning Hands.
It might be a better video for me.
Hey, it's me, your skin. This acne craves a powerful cleanse. New CeraVe Acne Wash treats.
What's up, everybody? Renfail here, and welcome to this. Tieflings, as it describes here, are descended from the devils of the 9 hells. They face constant suspicion in Faerun, not quite as much as the Drow, but they do tend to be looked at strangely by many because they are, of course, half-breeds essentially, who have some sort of devil blood in them. Now, the various looks, the way they look depends on the type of tiefling you're going to be picking, and we're going to dive into the sub-races here in a minute. But first up, let's just look at the racial features. Base racial speed of 9 meters with the up to 12 meters, and hellish resistance to fire damage, which means you only take half damage from it, which is really cool if you want this character to be in the heart of battle and you're laying down fireballs and other stuff, because you can get them pretty buffed up against fire resistances. Now, when we turn to the sub-races here, the Asmodeus Tiefling, it says here, they've inherited the ability to wield fire and darkness from the Archdevil Asmodeus' infernal bloodline, and you get the produce flame cantrip at your disposal. The Mephistopheles Tiefling it says gifted with a particular affinity for arcane magic, which is a lot of fun. But you get Mage Hand as a cantrip, so that's a nice little bonus here. And the Zerial Tiefling gets Thaumaturgy as a cantrip, which
The
gives you
hand might be
advantage on
good.
intimidation and performance checks, which is why I think a lot of people who play bards really like to go with the Zerial Tiefling, because you are going to get advantage on all of those performance checks, and
The
those are
performance
fun
sounds pretty
when
good to
you're
go for.
using a bard. Intimidation is more towards the fighters and strength-based characters, which is why, you know, these are a great choice for like barbarians or fighters, you know, who are going to be right up front using strength as their primary stat. So bear that in mind if you decide to go with a Tiefling. I personally have a Mephistopheles Bard, which we're playing in the multiplayer streams. But that was just a personal preference because I like the skin color and I think they look really cool. But honestly, it just depends on what you want as your cantrip here. And Thaumaturgy is probably the best choice if you want to get into the meta of things.
Mm,
Well, there you have it, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed this quick guide of the day. And if you want more like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update. Daily streams at 11 a.m. Central. Don't forget to check out the Discord. And until next time, stay safe and happy gaming.
I've been playing Baldur's Gate 3 or editing Baldur's Gate 3 videos or watching Baldur's Gate 3 streams every waking minute for
I'll go
over a week
edit it
now.
out.
Now, firstly, I may have a problem, but secondly, I've collected some mistakes that I've made and I've seen a number of other people make, so hopefully we can all get better at this fantastic game together. So let's go! Let me know any cool things that you have come across in Baldur's Gate 3, and it might appear in an upcoming video. So firstly, I want to talk about proficiencies, especially armor proficiencies, and a couple of other things you need to be aware of. So generally, proficiencies aren't all built the same. And in terms of armor, what I mean by that is even if you have characters that may be proficient in medium armor or heavy armor, it's often not the best case for them to wear. The best example of this is obviously the Barbarian with their unarmored defense. When you're not wearing armor, you can add your Constitution modifier to your armor class, but there are several other things that you need to consider. So the main reason that you're wearing armor or should be wearing armor is because of your armor class. And what this does is that anytime a particular roll is made, that attack roll will then be compared with the character's armor class to determine whether that attack hits or not. So obviously the higher your character's armor class is, the better, because they have a higher chance of avoiding any damage coming towards them. But that isn't necessarily just increased